Welcome for those new to my channel. Welcome for those returning back. Welcome back. I appreciate your viewership, no matter how you found me. So this is another ladder race. As you can see, we are going up against the OTR Grit team. And if you look at the colors, they're a pretty solid team. Good numbers, solid colors. And, you know, for us, this was an opportunity to, you know, really just mingle, I'll say, with the teams. You know, we fielded a strong team between myself, Riz, Andrew, Ryan, and we got JD, newcomer to the team for this week. And, you know, we knew that we came in with a lot of talent. We knew we came with a lot of talent. So, you know, we fully expected to push ourselves, but again, like I said, they came fielding a good squad, and, you know, we didn't want to just rest on our laurels as we head out the pen there and just not going 1,000 watts like we normally would out the pen, just kind of easing out in order to, you know, feel the team out. But ultimately, and I will jump forward here a bit, ultimately what ends up happening this first little bit is Andrew and Ryan end up basically playing a cat and mouse, or, you know, Tom and Jerry style, you know, chase one after another, and just pushing the front group hard, very hard. And so that, you know, ultimately ends up dropping a couple guys on both sides, because we didn't really want to, you know, we wanted to let them go up a road is what it came down to. And so this is kind of what that looks like, you know, as we are, you know, pushing forward. We start hitting this, you know, sandy part, and, you know, we've got a couple of our guys pushing, you know, I'm pushing, you know, we're just doing our best to, you know, again, really set the tone. We got, you know, Ryan up the road 7 seconds, you know, myself and Andrew kind of push hard, and, you know, just really set the expectation that we want to push. We want to go hard. We don't want to just, you know, we don't want it to be an easy race on any side. And so right now we've kind of, you know, we pushed to the point where we ended up creating a bit of a gap on the group. You see Riz is about 2 seconds back. And then JD, you know, JD's there with the rest of the group, rest of the OTR guys about 6-7 seconds back. And, you know, while we were doing this, we were basically, you know, letting them know, hey, you know, if we continue pushing, just, you know, letting JD know, like, hey, stay with the group, you know, let them pull and see how things go. And so jumping ahead again, as we hit this corkscrew bridge, you can see that it is myself, Ryan, Andrew, and Riz already up the road. We've got 17 seconds, 18 seconds on the group. And Ryan and Andrew, man, they're funny guys, man. They will push each other till the end, not only in our Discord chat, but also, you know, in the race. So, you know, they constantly push each other, make each other work hard, which is great because it, you know, ultimately makes for an entertaining race. And as you can see, you know, the OTR rider put a message there saying, you know, engage the plan. You know, they really, you know, they did awesome, and they, you know, maintained a great spirit about kind of how things ended up, with 4 of us up the road and JD just basically in a hammock, kind of being serenaded by the OTR team. You know, he didn't have to do anything, and that's, you know, ultimately that's race tactics. You've got 4 guys up the road working together. If you're the 5th guy and you're hanging with the other team, you don't need to do squat. You can just chill and let them pull you forward. And so that's kind of what ends up happening. So again, I'm going to jump forward to the end of the race. And so as we get 1.4 kilometers away from the end, we've got still all 4 of us together. JD and the OTR team are about, you know, 47 seconds back. You see there's a couple OTR guys that fell off at 220. And so, you know, JD ain't got to do squat. He's just, you know, hanging out. And you see, you know, Andrew and Ryan, again, they keep attacking each other and pushing up the road. And, we were joking about, while we were on chat, we were joking about, you know, having a sprint finish amongst the four of us. And those guys took off. Now, a kilometer to go, I'm not going to try and sprint that. I'm not going to try and, compete with them. I was already gassed out at this point. I'm doing, 300 plus watts just to still continue to get gapped by them. And so I'm looking at it as, in my head, and again, I told Riz this because I was like, I should have said it out loud, but I ended up saying it on my head. I was like, if I can lead Riz out on this sprint, then, what I'll do is I'll just push hard and then try and get as close to them as possible and then let Riz just sprint it out with them. But again, I didn't say it out loud. And so obviously he had no clue what I was doing. I was so in my own head of just trying to get to the end. Because I knew these guys, were 5-6 seconds up the road already. And I wasn't gonna myself be able to compete with the sprint. But if I can get Riz close enough, then I know he'll be able to, make up that distance. Cause like we've seen before, he can close a gap, with ease. And so that's kind of, what I was, planning here. You see Riz, start to push up a bit. I start to draft off of him. I thought he was going for the sprint, but he was just like, dude, let them go. Let them go. We're done. We're, nothing we need to do. You can see on Sauce, they've got, they hit 1,000 plus watts. You see Riz do one last sprint. I wasn't going to try and out sprint him. And so, he went off like a rocket doing, 900, 1,000 watts. And yeah, so that was the end of this race. We ultimately ended up crossing the line, I think first through fifth, maybe. And so, obviously, points wise, we won this race. And again, the OTR guys were good sports about it. And so they were, essentially chatting it up in the messenger after the race. So, good guys, good sports. And we just, we did what we could to make the race hard, but also, see where everybody's legs are at. And so now moving on to the WTRL Team Time Trial Zone 11. This time we are in the Knickerbocker reverse course. Now, if you've ever raced in New York, inevitably there's going to be some sort of adventure with the glass roads on some of the routes. In particular, this route, we do go up the glass roads. Now, this is a morning race. So I decided to do, for my TTTs, I decided to do essentially double duty. So morning and evening, in order to, my focus is getting my, 20-minute power up. I know there's, bigger name channels out there that do not think 20-minute power is essential when it comes to racing, but I will talk more about this at the end. But I am a firm believer that if you have a strong 20-minute power, you can still you'll maintain more control over a race than someone who doesn't have a strong 20-minute power. And so, as we set off on this TTT, this is a Mocha team, if I remember correctly. DW20 is a Mocha team. And so the expectations are not, we're still pushing hard. I think our set watts for our pulls is like 3.8, somewhere around there. So not far from what I'm normally do on the latte team. But, with the group that we had, the focus was, hey, let's just do our best to stay together, and get to the end together as best as possible. So I wanted to jump forward here to the glass roads because, as you see, I am, right now I'm up front. I'm a few seconds, me and one of our other guys, actually no, different guy, 2 seconds or a few seconds ahead of the team. And so I wanted to talk about kind of this issue that I'm seeing with virtual gearing, at least with my own, setup, because I should have, when it came to a stage like this, I probably should have switched my virtual gear setup to a climbing profile or an all-arounder instead of the flat profile, because as you see, I'm in gear 1, doing, 400 plus watts up this 15% climb and at 60 RPM. This is literally like the the only thing I could manage. And so because because gear one, I was still pushing out, 300 plus watts. I ended up essentially pushing myself forward in front of the team, because I couldn't stay lower than that. If I went any lower than that, then that means I had to drop my RPMs. And if I dropped my RPMs, it became too hard to spin. And ultimately, you know, pushing down on the trainer when it feels like it's locked up is just terrible. And so I ended up, pushing harder to get up to the top of the climb, and then just, you know, eased up a little bit so that way I can let the team catch up. And they were, they were letting me know like, hey, we're getting close, we're almost there, so that way I can start ramping up my speed. Because the last thing that I would want to happen is them to pass me and then get dropped, by them on this downhill. So I ramped up my speed as best I could to ultimately fall back in line. Now at this point, you see we got 5 riders. We started with 6. One of our guys, actually no, Tex is in there, but ultimately Tex ends up, if I remember correctly, he was, especially after this climb, struggling a bit to catch his breath and kind of get his heart rate to settle, which that is never fun when you're racing and at any level when you're racing and you feel like your performance is capped, almost like your engine intake is plugged up somewhere. So he still finished strong, which is always great. We always want to make sure our guys finish as best as possible, ideally with the group, but ultimately finish nonetheless. So just wanted to throw that out there, and I will again jump to the finish line here. And so as we get down to this last 300 meters, you see there is 4 of us right now. Like I mentioned before, Tex ended up, just letting us know, hey, just, keep pushing forward. So hopefully he's good. He got, either got looked at or just kind of, getting back into the rhythm of things. And so as we cross the finish line, it wasn't at this moment, I wasn't, in any rush to kind of push the envelope. Although I will say, that gap between myself and Xanadu, we probably should have closed that gap, just to make sure that we're not too far behind from each other, because it's always going to be beneficial in the overall standings, to have your team, especially your final 4, cross the line together as best as possible. But that is, that's how things go sometimes. So I'm going to jump forward to my evening TTT race. And so as we start rolling here, I ended up, literally forgetting to start my recording until the first, kilometer or so in. We had just gotten past the quote unquote lead in, neutralize. I do wish Zwift would make it a neutralized lead in. I thought I heard on one of the Zwift podcasts, they mentioned that they were going to make a way, like essentially make it where it's like a neutralized race, starting off. Now this time around, so back on DW9, even though I forgot to change my name, back on DW9, which, as a latte team, we are, maniacs. Is the best way I can put it. We go hard, and it's a well executed team, well organized. We're every day getting better, even though, we have some riders that rotate in and out, like myself. If I miss a week for travel or something else, someone jumps in. This time around, Smallville, who I called Smallville, that's not his actual last name, but he was out this week, and so we are doing our, as people come in and out, we're still doing our best to, communicate. We got Greg on, doing the DS for us while, we're racing at the same time. And he's just fantastic at, keeping us organized. As you can see, we got, beautiful, beautiful line there going and, moving, and we're moving up this hill, just doing our best to stay a bit organic. Not, we have our, we have our pull sheet, but we're not, we're not heavily focused on, keeping to the pull sheet, because we know that the people who want to, the people who want to race are gonna push themselves, are gonna take pulls. The B category riders, or B pace riders, will often end up pushing forward and taking more turns in order to give the C category riders or the C pace group riders a chance to just kind of sit in and and kind of get used to the tempo. Now, even though I am still a C pace group rider, which hopefully I will get past that at some point. I feel like I've hit a wall where I can't get my 20-minute and 5-minute power to the B pace group numbers. But put that aside. And so those guys do fantastic job of just taking turn after turn after turn. And I do my best to jump in there, even though I'm not a B pace group rider. I will still jump in as many times as I can. Oftentimes, and kind of the issue I'm having right now is I've switched to a setup where I have headphones that connect directly to my laptop and microphone and my regular microphone. And so sometimes I don't know if it's the echoing or what it is, but the guys won't hear me. So I'll let them know, hey, I'm going to jump in, take a turn. And then I'll hear Greg or somebody else like, hey, I'm jumping in, going off the front. So I will, obviously not try to push myself if they're already going. And so it's just a matter of making sure I'm, getting the communication across when it comes down to it.
Good line. Really good line.
Yep.
So I wanted to include the Discord audio on this section so you can hear what it sounds like to have an amazing DS take you up a climb like this as a group together.
All right, guys, here comes the fun.
You put finger quotes around that, right? That's where I usually try to have a dropout.
Oh, I don't mind a little pain.
There will be F words. I'm not sure about fun.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
All right, Casey, I'm going to drop.
Yep. I'm going to look backwards and I'm going to try to stay high threes. Okay. 4. It may take me a minute to settle here as we shift in. I will hold this pace across the flat sections too. So don't let us accelerate away from us when we get there. Copy that. All right. Easy. Here you go. Smooth. Fill in mid-pack back there a little bit if you can, guys. Okay. Yep. Yeah, thank you. Steep bit there. Good. That's it. That's it. That's it, Brian. Keep going. That's it, DC. Stay with it all you can.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. Good, Brian. Go on past me. Good. It flattens out here. Get established in the group here. It's a bump then flat again. Stay into the flat. This is a hill of bumps. Nice. Come forward on the flat in the back. Another bump. Bring that tail up. Don't chase me. Stay smooth. Good. That was good to not run away from the back of the pack there. I'm fading back.
Come on, I'm gonna get out, Brian. You got it.
We can almost see the top on that gradient above our head now.
Certainly see a
Here we
couple
go, Brian.
The blue, look
Come
to
on.
the blue. Work to the blue.
Easy up front.
It's smoother than the pack.
There you go, Brian.
Beautiful.
Stay in there. Stay in there. There's the top. That last bit of blue is the top. I'd really like us to get there together. Come on. We will.
You got it.
If you're at the back, don't rest too much here. You got to roll on this flat a little bit. Spin up before we start going up here. If you're at the back. Spin up at the back. Roll it forward.
I'll bring him up.
Don't surge. Just heavy pressure. You'll slide right up to us. Good. Smooth at the front.
There you go, Brian.
One more bump.
That's it. Hi, Brian.
Guys,
Stay.
don't attack this bump. Same pace. If we attack it, we lose people. You just gotta do
Easy,
what we're
Miguel.
doing.
Let Casey do his thing.
Roll across the blue here. Don't let the tail get long here. Same thing. Roll into it now. Roll into it. Back
There you
to
go.
that.
That's it.
Resist the big kick. It's steep. We got to go together.
There you go, Brian. You got this. Come on.
Remember, we got to accelerate at the top. The guys at the back have to accelerate at the top.
Push
If you're in
Brian.
front of me.
Push
Don't run
Brian.
away. Come on, Brian.
You're right there, buddy. You're right there. Lots of rest on the other side.
5
Yeah,
meters
Brian.
behind you, 4 meters. Come on.
Here you go, Brian.
You're there, brother. Come on. You need like 30 seconds here, Brian.
Easy up front. Get it together.
You three
Okay.
stay behind Brian. Stay behind Brian there. Brian, just focus on my yellow jersey.
There you go. That's it, DC.
There you go.
Yeah, we're
Keep
good.
pushing. Keep pushing.
Okay,
We're
Get up here,
full
DC.
pack. Keep pushing.
There you go.
I'm still accelerating us.
Come on, Seth.
Come around.
All right. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. As you can see, it really does take it's a particular set of skills in order to be able to DS like that going up the hill and keep the team together. As you see, all 8 of us got across the KOM line together. And as we hit this downhill, we were absolutely flying. Casey and Greg and the guys were, just encouraging, like, hey, just keep pushing. Don't let it settle. We've got some, there's a few flats here on the descent, but, just keep spinning those legs, keep pushing. We wanted to get down as fast as possible. As you see, we're at 82, 84 kilometers an hour, 85 kilometers an hour. Absolutely flying. Now this 87, oh my God, I didn't realize we hit almost 90 kilometers an hour. This became actually a pivotal point in our race because we ended up crossing the line. And and I'll, again, reiterate that as we get there, but we ended up crossing the line and taking 4th place overall in our division. And we were only 7 seconds behind from 1st place, which of course 1st place was Eat Dirt 2. But again, us being, 7 seconds behind, we were absolutely floored for it, because that means, that I truly do feel like the descent after the KOM was truly the pivotal moment where we maintained our distance over, over Eat Dirt 2, and that ultimately kept us in a spot where we could cross the line and take, 4th place overall. And so, as I mentioned, as we're coming to the line, we did end up dropping one person, but not by much. I think there are only, a few, I guess they ended up falling into the group behind them, which is about 20 seconds back, 25 seconds back. But, we were just pushing as hard as we can, and Casey, Greg, and all the guys are just, we're encouraging each other to keep going, keep pushing. This is the last 400 meters. Let's, keep the power up. As exhausted as we all are, we're just pushing as hard as we can to make sure we cross the line as, as tight a group as possible. Because again, TTTs are all about the 4th person coming across the line. So, depending on where that 4th person's at is ultimately, the time that you're going to get as a team. And if you can stay together as a team rather than trying to out sprint each other, that'll allow you to really get a good, a good timing going across the line. So as you see, we ultimately crossed the line, and I ended up crossing about 30-ish seconds, it looks like, in front of the Team Type 1 rider. And so I don't think they were in our division. I don't remember. But there you go. So strong numbers, and again, we did absolutely fantastic. Such a great team to be on. And so jumping to the next race, the ZRacing Cityscapes in Richmond. I'm in the 510 to 650 category. And this time around, I'm racing it with my buddy Colin. So this was a race in the middle of the day. So Eastern time was like 11 something in the morning on a Friday. And so I was, wasn't sure how this race would go, but there was a lot more people in the pen than some of the times that I normally race at. You see, we got 12 people right now. In some of the races that I've done recently on, the weekends, the pen is somewhere between, 10 and 15 people, sometimes less, sometimes more. But this time around felt good. And with Colin in the pink jersey there right in front of me, and he's on the coalition squad. And so we were, he wanted to race at this time. I was like, great, let me know, because I want to race in a different time frame, because I feel like, so when it comes to the ZRacing series, if you're going for GC, there's 2 different things you have to look out for. The first one being, if you're going for GC and Zwift power, you need to make sure you stay in the category that you initially started off in. So in my case, the first race that I did, my ZRS put me in the A pen category. And so all the races from there on out, you have to race in the A's. You have to race in the top pen. Depending on whether it's range 1 or range 2, that could mean you're either racing with people who are similar in your abilities, or you could be vastly outperformed. And so in this case, I was around, I thought I was going to be in a group with people similar to my abilities. But boy, oh boy, was I wrong. Now you see right now, my average is 280, and we're holding steady. The guys off the front are doing 4.5 to 5.5 watts, and just absolutely on fire. And so myself and Colin were talking about it in his chat. So I will link his video, so that way you can go check it out, as well as JD and anyone else I raced with that has channels. I'll do my best to link theirs as well. And so Colin and I were talking about it, like, man, these guys are pushing, and they're pushing really, really hard. And, ultimately what it came down to is they did not stop pushing. They kept the pace absolutely on fire. I don't think I dropped below my 270, 280 average for the first, basically up until the climbs. And so I'm going to jump forward because it's really just a lot of me trying to, keep up with this front group and, do my best not to get dropped. And so as we hit the start of the climbing, we're still fairly all together, but as you see, my average is still right around 260, which for a normal pace, it's hard. You see my shirt colors already changed. It's multiple colors there from all the sweat. And at this point, I'm hurting. Now, after racing, so when I did this race, this was on a Friday. Thursday, I did 2 TTTs. Wednesday, I did a club ladder race. Monday I did a club ladder race. Tuesday I didn't have ZRL. Sunday prior to that I did ZRacing. So it's been back to back racing, and so I was absolutely gassed. Especially at this point, man, my legs were on fire, and so I'm pushing as hard as I can, trying to keep up. I know that getting across these first 2 climbs are absolutely pivotal to being able to, get to the end and be a contender for the final sprint. But ultimately, as you see, I'm starting to fall behind very quickly. That front group, which includes Colin, that front group is about 4 seconds ahead, and still, splitting up themselves. You see, I've got the one rider in front of me that's a few seconds ahead. Riders in front of him, and we're just all over these cobblestones. And so I just keep pushing as best I can. At this point, I'm thinking I could, make up the distance once I get to the top of the climb, and do my best to try and basically get on the back of this group as I get over the climb, knowing that there's a second climb coming that's equally as, hard and steep. It's just not as long as this climb is. And so as I'm continuing to fall further and further behind, you see the front group of 5 is already 20 seconds ahead of me. And at this point, I know that, my podium contention is basically done. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to compete with these guys for the podium at this point. So as I cross the KOM there, I'm just, looking to settle into a good rhythm, so that way I can, see how much ground I can make up. And, as you see, so looking at the amount of riders. So Zwift says there's 9 out of 14 riders. Sauce shows, that group of 5 up front. You've got another 4 or 5 people in there. So it's about, essentially, I'm in 9th place. So 9 going up to me. And then you have 2 riders that are in the back that are, 4 minutes behind and 9.5 minutes behind. Now, I don't know if those riders are actually rolling. Like, you see them doing 100-something watts. So maybe they are out on the course altogether, but I don't see how there's 14 riders in this race. And so as we're going through, at this point, I'm just looking at, where can I finish? Obviously, the person behind me is not going to catch up. I'm basically the last person in this race. At least that's how I felt. So I hit this, secondary climb and just give it what I can. I see the rider in front of me. I know that I'm not that far behind him, even though Sauce says I'm about 18-ish seconds behind. And so I figured if I could just push hard and catch up, make up some distance on this part of the climb. Although I am in the SL8 with the disc wheels, I truly think the disc was not the right choice for this course, even though it did help me with keeping up with this group, staying with this front group up until that first climb. These climbs, it was too painful, absolutely too painful. And so I'm going to jump forward to the end of the race here. And so as I start to hit this last climb, you see that I'm about, 20 plus seconds behind the rider in front of me, 26 seconds behind them, and just, almost a minute behind the guys up front. And so that actually includes Colin. Colin is up there about 35 seconds ahead of me, and he's only got the one rider in front of him who's about 50 seconds ahead. And that guy that was, one of the riders from the very beginning that's been doing 5 watts per kilogram. Like he just did not stop riding at above 5 watts per kilogram. And so I am just doing my best to kind of, finish at this point. Maintain some good wattage on the climb. As you saw in the TTT, I can hold around 3.8 to 4 on a climb. Not necessarily for that long. Shorter climbs for sure I can do that. Longer climbs I definitely can't hold it that long. I'll end up dropping a 3.5 at some point. But in this case, I don't have to hold 4.0 for very long. But as you see, I'm already starting to drop my wattage there and get into the mid to low 3s. I'm in gear 4. I know that I'm almost at the end. I've got 700 meters left, and just trying to see if I can close that gap between me and the rider in front of me, knowing that if I can close it, then at least I won't be the last person across the line. But ultimately, I end up not making any progress at this point. It is just a slow, what felt like a slow death, as I got up to the finish line there. You see the rider in front of me is now 22 seconds ahead. Ultimately, because they were able to maintain their wattage where I couldn't. My legs were hurting so much at this point. Absolutely so much. Now, I'm doing this on a Friday. I've got a scheduled race on Saturday. And what is that scheduled race? Tiny races. And so I will, I'll put a little banner up. So if you want to check that out, I ended up doing it as a live, which was a absolutely fantastic setup. Eric Schlage from Zwift Insider set it up so that way it's a mass start race, which for people like me, I love the mass start race because that means I get to really push myself to see what my actual true potential is. And so whether it's keeping up with some of the A pace riders, or hovering in the B pace riders, or the back of the B pace or front of the P, like it's a good opportunity for me to really get a feel for where my performance is at. And so as I get ready to cross the finish line here, I'm just trying to finish as strong as I can, get as best as time as I can, because again, when it comes to the ZRacing series, your finishing time on that course is ultimately what's going to add up for your GC. So if you're in a group that is going slow, you're not going to improve your GC times. It's just not going to happen. And so racing in a race like this where you're going up against some really fast guys, and they're able to pull you for as long as they did, which in their case, they pulled me really far. Because I was struggling the whole way to keep up with him. As you can see, Colin crossed in second place. Fantastic, job for him because he crossed 3 seconds, almost 4 seconds behind the first place rider who was doing 5 watts the whole time. As you see, his average was 4.8, the entire race. And everybody, basically everybody until me was averaging, well above the 3s. I ended up averaging 3.1 because, like you saw, once I broke. I wasn't able to keep up. So that's how that ZRacing went, and off to the next race. Now, this is the Monday after my adventures with the tiny races, doing another club ladder race. This time we are going up against the Fury Rhinos, and boy, oh boy, did we have a great time with them. So, I'll, post the numbers up. Looking at the numbers there, you can see that we very well stacked this group. Now, you guys didn't see Mike Bell's numbers, but he is another strong rider. So we really came with just a absolute monster of a squad this time around. And it was really before we knew who they were bringing. But ultimately, we just kind of kept the team the way it is. Now, I will link to Brian's channel so you can check out the Rhinos perspective and their audio so you can see, ultimately see both sides of the race. And, we ended up doing exactly what we did on previous races. We raced and went ahead and then ended up, getting 4 guys off the front to where in this case, Mike Bell got to be the Mike Bell got to be the rider that got to chill in the in the group with the rhinos. And we pushed hard. We absolutely pushed hard on this race. And so jumping forward, you see we've got Andrew up the road, got Ryan coming in hot behind me. And Ryan and Andrew were doing their thing. They they're pushing each other, and in this case, in this race, they were actually essentially attacking off the front, and they kept surging, and one after another, surge, and just them two. Riz was also doing it as well. I ended up not participating in that because my legs were still very, very sore from the weekend and last week's races. And so, sat in as best as possible. You see, we've got Ryan and Andrew up the road already. They're about 4 or 5 seconds up the road. And, we really just wanted to see, at this point, Riz was like, hey, let's just settle in. We'll see whether or not they want to chase. If they don't chase, don't worry about it. Let them go. If they do chase, then, we will, we'll just do our best to keep up with them. And so jumping forward to the Aqueduct KOM, as you can see, we're all still together. Andrew and Ryan have about 20-ish, almost 30 seconds ahead of us at this moment. And so, as we start approaching this, Riz and I are like, hey, let's keep an eye on them. They're going to want to push. They're going to want to, at worst case scenario, they're going to want to, push hard on the KOM to see if they can drop us. And then try and, make up the distance between them and our 2 guys up front. And so as we start to hit the middle part of this climb, so far nothing's happening. And it's kind of like it's a hesitation game of like, do we go? Do we not go? Do we push first? Do we let them push first? And so we see, one guy launches arrow on the front. Second guy starts to push, so I start to push. Riz comes up behind me, starts to push. You see Mike right behind us pushing as well. And so as we get up this, as we get to this middle part of the KOM, doing my best just to hold a good strong wattage. Now, as I hit this, 3-4% riser, I end up, the gears start to lock up on me a bit. But I was like, all right, let me, play with the shifter, get into the right gear. I end up passing, their guy and just keep pushing forward. I saw Riz off the front and I was like, hey, if I can catch Riz, we can, we've got a little bit of a gap on them already. We're about, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, something like that. And so, and this is where, as we were talking on Discord, Ryan and Andrew are like, hey, push, push, push. Riz is like, hey, just stay back. Don't worry about it. But ultimately we ended up kind of coming to an agreement. So like, hey, just push. Cause you see, right now our 2 guys are only 12 seconds off of where Riz is at. And I'm only 5 seconds off the back of Riz. And so I was just, at this point I was like, all right, if I can bridge up to Riz, then we can work together and, and ultimately, catch up to our 2 guys in front and basically repeat what we did, these last few races where, we're just, 4 guys off the front and doing our best to, to hold on to, to work together and hold on to that lead. And so that's ultimately what ends up happening in this race. And so as we get to the end here, we are, prior to this, we're talking about whether or not we want to sprint at the end. We basically have, almost a minute gap, and we're kind of undecided, but, of course, Andrew and Ryan are like, hey, we're going to sprint anyways. So here we go.
Let's do it. Ah! Oh my God. Dude, you got me on the last, like, oh no, I got it. Holy shit.
And so as you see there, So Zwift put me in first place by 0.03 seconds, but in reality, if you replay the video really slow, you'll see that Andrew was in front of me. Like, he was probably a tire length in front of me, a tire width in front of me, but he was definitely in front of me when we crossed the line. At least, when it seemed like we crossed the line. So, but Zwift still put me ahead by 0.03 seconds. So there you go. And so now this is the final race of this recap. This is the ZRL Summer Showdown, and it is all about the sprinting. And so I'm going to essentially rapid fire put these sprints back to back. Did my best to encourage the chat there as we get rolling off the line. But boy, oh boy, can I say that this was a hard race. Man, there were some fast racers. And so jumping into the first sprint, you see we're at 28 kilometers, and someone starts to go off the front. One of the dirt guys goes off the front. I don't think that's one of our guys. No, it was Bennett on the DW. So he's tagged DW, but he's probably on a different team there. So, I'm going off the front with the Sisu guy. I figured if I can stick with the Sisu guys, because they really were some of the strongest riders in the race, then I know I'll do well. And so, as you can see, everybody's pushing hard. I'm in the 700s. I'm trying to not overdo it, trying to not get into the thousands, just because I know I've got a lot of sprinting to do this race. And I've got to say, it was a bitter memory when I finished, a bitter reminder of how hard it is to go for these segments on a race like this. It makes the race infinitely harder. And so here we go on the next sprint, which is essentially the longest of the sprints that we have. This is the new cobblestone 750 meter sprint, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this is it. The Dos de An sprint, if that's pronounced correctly. Now, I got to say, some guys went off exceptionally fast early on this sprint. And so as you can see, I'm pushing the pace up a little bit, like I'm pushing my wattage up a little bit, but I'm not sprinting at this point. I'm just trying to keep up, keep in the draft of these front guys. And these guys are pushing hard. But I feel like, on a 750 meter sprint, if you can't, especially with this sprint having 3 kind of little rolling hills that, really slows you down quite a bit. If you don't have the legs to do that long of a sprint, don't do it. Like, really don't do it. Because as you can see, what's happening is I'm only doing 300 and something watts, and I'm keeping up just fine with this front group. Now, as we turn the corner, I see the sprint banner, and I'm like, all right, I need to get going. They've got about a second gap in front of me, but I know that I can make up that gap. I've launched my aero power up, but as you can see, a lot of guys are slowing down at the end. A lot of guys are slowing down at the end. So I end up crossing, 5th place in the FAL, or FTS rather. FAL, I don't know where I was at, but I'm pretty sure I was around there, 5th or 6th place. And so again, when it comes down to these kind of sprints, especially if you're going for FAL, all that matters is who gets across the line first, and those first, I think, 20 positions. And so unless you're, if you're going for FTS, great, but FTS doesn't offer enough points to really make it worth it. FAL is truly where it's at when it comes to points. And if you're a good sprinter, you'll end up getting both. And so here we go, coming up to the next sprint, which is the Pabe sprint. And again, another, 330 meter sprint. And as you can see, some guys go, really hard early on. And so I just, I push as hard as I can just to kind of stay with them. And again, I'm trying to stay in that 700-800 watt range. I'm not trying to max out on my sprint, but I do want to, I want to get as close to the front as possible. And as you can see, I end up easing off really early, but I still end up crossing the line in 3rd place on this sprint. And it's ultimately because I had enough momentum, and the 2 guys in front of me were basically, I got to draft off of them those last, 10, 20 meters, whatever it was. And so with little to no rest, here we go again on the next sprint. And boy, oh boy, these back-to-back sprints were absolutely treacherous, except this time we're going up the aqueduct. And so it's not technically a sprint, it's a KOM. But if you don't treat it like a sprint, then you'll end up not doing well. And so I end up pushing myself to the front just because I wanted to hold, one of the things that I wanted to do in this race is just keep the pace strong. So what ends up happening on a race like this, where you have, at this point, we've already done 4 sprints. We've, hit, myself, I hit 800 watts 4 times at least. So people are starting to fatigue. But, and this is where, I wanted to talk about the 20-minute power. If you have a strong 20-minute power, ultimately you can push the envelope on the segments in between the sprints. And so that's kind of, what I was doing there a little bit as I was pushing on the climb, just enough so that way, just enough so that way people have to work a little bit harder, and ultimately end up losing some momentum when we get to, the aqueduct here. You see I'm doing, almost right around 6 watts per kilogram, 500-ish watts. I launch my power up as I get closer to the top, so that way I can, use that aero advantage as I hit the flat and then just kind of push myself, able to push myself forward. And again, this is where you have to be able to carry that momentum as you get over that climb. You have to be able to carry that momentum to this banner. If not, you'll end up losing a lot of steam, a whole lot of steam. So I end up getting a 4th for FTS, but 5th, it looks like 5th or 6th on the FAL. And again, right now we have a long distance between this, between this segment and the next. And so my goal is I'm going to push harder, even if it's pushing 3 watts per kilogram, I'm going to push harder so that way the group has to work harder in between segments. Because if you don't, what ends up happening is people will end up just coasting. And, they'll be doing 2 watts per kilogram, 1.8, somewhere around there, where it's just easy peasy, zone 2. And that'll give people ample time to recover. And if you've got a strong 20-minute power, this is where you start to determine how the race goes, because you can push the envelope, you can push harder. Your 20-minute power, especially, and even in spite of all the sprinting, if you got a strong 20-minute power, you'll be able to make people work harder when they don't want to. Now you see a couple of these guys are, lighting up their fire socks just to kind of, cause a little havoc there. And that's kind of, what ends up happening in these long segments is, myself and others end up pushing the pace harder. So that way, we can kind of maintain the pace that we're going at, but also see if, we can start to lose any of the stragglers that are, coming off the back. And right now we've got about 19 seconds off of the second group. And I definitely did not want that gap to come down. I wanted to make sure that we stayed at least 19 seconds ahead, because they could have easily caught us if we let our pace down. And so as we get ready to go on the next sprint, you see Leduc up there on the front. And I've got to say, chapeau to him. He ended up beating me in points by 2 points. And so on the finishing points, he ended up crossing the line, or getting 2 points ahead of me on this. So he did really good. A lot of sprints. He ended up, around me, in front of me, somewhere in there. Again, as we are getting through this sprint, at this point, I'm starting to really, really hurt. And so I see, these couple guys come across me, and then a couple more. And at this point I was like, all right, I can't let that happen again. I can't ease off so soon that I end up, falling so far down on the FAL points that, I get minimal points. Now, this being a group of 17, and FAL is generally top 20 or, top 20 positions. I wasn't going to end up losing any points. But at the same time, I didn't want to fall so far behind that I would, end up getting minimal points. I wanted to stay as close to the front as possible. And so as we get ready to go through this next sprint, which is the same, 750 meter sprint here, you can see that as we start to enter, some guys are pushing off the front really, really hard. And like I mentioned before, that's not, if you've got the power to do it, great. Again, this is where, I bring back the argument of if you've got a strong 20-minute power, then you can push the envelope on these segments, make people work harder sooner so that way you can burn them out before they get to the end. But ultimately, if you don't have the power to do it, then don't do it. Like, don't do it, because you'll end up burning yourself out before you get to the finish line or before you get to the banner, the segment banner, and you'll either slow down and lose positions, or you just won't have, or people end up passing you because you're not going fast enough. And as you can see, the pace starts to settle here in the middle. Got a couple guys come up on the right side with their power up. And now again, I thought this was still a little too early, for them to be pushing with their power ups, but that brought the group to push harder. As you can see, the rest of the group really started to push, push past me and push a lot harder. I was like, all right, they've got a couple seconds on me, no big deal. I'll be able to make it up. And so I launched my arrow and start to sprint. I ended up, going up to gear 24, which was absolutely furious, because my RPM dropped down to like 50 or so. And it was so hard for me to turn the gear. And so I end up crossing the line, way behind. It shows there that I got 9th on the across the line, which would be 9th place for FTS. But I'm pretty sure I was way further than that, on the FAO. It looks like I was around 13th, which again, didn't want to happen because again, that puts me in a position where I'm getting minimal points and it's not worth it at that point. All right. So jumping forward again to this sprint segment through the windmill section here, you see another, see the Sisu rider. Yeah, Sisu rider go off the front, start to push hard. And again, I start to push hard with them. Got a couple Sisu riders this time in TFC. And at this point I had enough time to recover where I was like, all right, I can push and push as hard as I can. You see some of the other guys are already dropping, dropping back. I'm trying to hold my wattage in the 500 to 600, ish, and ultimately cross the line. I thought I crossed at like 4th or 5th, but ended up, a couple positions back. A couple people caught me right on the line, which chapeau to them for being able to do that. But you see those Sisu guys, man, those Sisu guys are strong. They really, truly are. Every time I see a race, it's always the Sisu guys up front. Now, this sprint segment, again, is basically back-to-back. We had very little time to rest, and so I, did my best to push as hard as I can before this sprint segment because I did not want people resting. I wanted to stay in that, 3-ish watts per kilogram range, but ultimately, everybody kept up, no issues, and so I ended up dropping to the middle of the pack here, so that way I had enough people that I can draft off of so I can perform well on this sprint. And as you'll see, as we get closer, I'm just looking to, really work the draft on, on this sprint segment here. And so as we start to get through this hill, you see one guy off the front, which, they were pushing hard, and at the time I didn't think anything of it because I was like, wait, where are they going? Because coming from this direction, I didn't realize where the actual sprint segment was at. And so I was thinking like, man, what are they doing? Ultimately, and I ended up realizing this way too late. There wasn't a sprint segment coming up. This was actually for the finish line. And so these guys end up pushing off the front. You see this pink rider, or the rider on the pink Tron bike, second or two ahead of me. And so I'm thinking like, all right, I'll just kind of keep the pressure on where I'm at, like keep my wattage, but I'm not gonna, I wasn't gonna try and bridge, because again, I'm looking at the map and we've got these rolling hills. I'm thinking we're going to the green banner all the way at the other end of the route. I couldn't tell what that little red banner was. I didn't realize that was the actual finish. I'm looking at the distance to go and I'm like, all right, we're getting awfully close to the finish line. What's going on? And like I said before, as I'm thinking through this while I'm racing, I'm like, all right, that means like that group off the front is actually contending for the finish line, not for a sprint segment. And so that's when I start to realize like, all right, I need to stay with this group. I can't get dropped. I got to be able to, compete with these guys. And, you know, these guys off the front are not that far ahead of us. They're only 5 seconds ahead, which I truly, the mistake, absolute mistake that I made was not bridging this gap. I could have easily bridged that gap. But ultimately, I ended up not doing it because I wasn't, it truly was a, you know, I wasn't thinking about the finish line. I was just thinking about, you know, what the next, you know, sprint segment was, and just kind of in that confusion. But I also, once I realized it, I was like, all right, as long as I can stay close to them, because at this point I'm already realizing what's happening. I'm like, all right, if I can stay close to them, you know, keep that 5 second gap, then, you know, potentially once they get, you know, off the back of that next hill, I might be able to catch up to them on the sprint. You know, if I can sprint hard enough, then maybe I'll, you know, I'll come in right behind them. But as you can see, you know, everybody at this point is realizing that if we don't catch them, they're for sure gonna take, you know, the top spots. And so everybody's pushing as hard as they can through this downhill segment. And I am, you know, trying to rest as best I can, but also trying to stay on the back of this group, just kind of playing with the gears in order to kind of stay there. And so again, as we hit this last hump through these, you know, through these rolling hills, through this kind of seesaw or, you know, sawtooth section, I'm just looking at, okay, if I can stay with this group, then, you know, potentially we'll have enough distance. You know, we've got about a kilometer, a little over a kilometer left to go. That might be enough distance to bridge that gap, but right now these guys got 10 seconds on us. And so especially looking at it now, there's no way we would have closed that 10 seconds, you know, in that kilometer time frame. It would take a lot of work for us to do that. And, you know, we've got some strong riders in this second group here, but probably not strong enough at this point to, you know, to bridge that gap. And like you see, you know, they've got 11 seconds on us now. And as we start to roll down this hill, I'm just, you know, I'm doing my best to kind of keep my momentum going. I'm doing 100 plus RPM and just really holding on to it as best I can until we get to, you know, till we get to this finish line. I know I'm going to have to sprint it out. We've got 800 meters left to go. And so I figure if I can just keep, you know, if I can keep pushing harder, then I'll close that gap a little bit. You see the gaps come down to about 8 seconds, 7-ish seconds now, to the Sisu rider essentially right in front of me. And so as I see the guys on the horizon there, I figured, you know, I'm not that far away. I can just keep the momentum going. Now, you know, while I was racing, I look down and I see everybody's, you know, a few seconds behind me, or a few meters behind me rather. And so I knew as we hit that turn, I was like, all right, let me let them get in front of me so I can draft off of them and push as hard as I can. I launch my power up, see all the power ups start to launch, and I just give it as much of a sprint as possible. Because at this point I knew I wasn't going to podium, but at least if I can do as best as possible, then, you know, best as possible on the sprint, then I will do what I can. And so ultimately that little, you know, that last 20, 30 meters or so, I end up coasting and able to take top 10 in the 10th position here, which for as tough as this race was, I was absolutely happy that I crossed the line in 10th place, because that means not only did I get a good amount of finishing points for this race, for FAL at the end there, but also, you know, I did well in a lot of the sprints, so I was able to accumulate quite a bit of points. Not enough to, you know, write home about per se. You know, our team still, you know, didn't do too well this time around, but that just goes to show that, you know, we were in a category where we were racing against some really strong racers, really strong racers. And so, you know, we did great with what we had. Unfortunately, it was just myself and one other guy on the team this time, you know, on this race. And so between the two of us, we did as best we can and holding on as best as possible in spite of how crazy this race was. So that is it for this wrap up. Boy, oh boy, if you stuck around this far, thank you so much. I know it went a long time, and I will do my best to organize these wrap-ups so that way they are more condensed. But I wanted to get through the races that I've gone through and just cover anything that's happened since the last, video update. And so again, I'm going to work on condensing these so that way they're a little bit more condensed, to repeat the same word 100 times. And so, yeah, I appreciate you guys if you stuck around this long, and I hope you saw the Easter eggs that I threw in there. And if you didn't, go ahead and go back. You will find them. So appreciate you guys, and I will catch you on the next race when I go live for the tiny races. Hey guys, it's Miguel from that thing you just watched. Hope you enjoyed that video, whether it was topic on nutrition or racing or a combination of both. Feel free to come back. I will continue to put out videos like this and continue to showcase what you can do with smart nutritional strategies, combining that with racing, because that is what this channel is all about. And feel free to check in if you want to see more racing. Click on wherever the link's at, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next race.